In today's show, we have another of our popular TNT Dynamite Conspiracy episodes. And today we discuss government overreach. How much power should they have? Including things like climate lockdowns and digital currencies.
And now, the TNT Talk Show, daring to go where other podcasts fear to tread.
Hello, I'm Tony Fasulo and I share the stage with my esteemed friend and colleague, Tayo Boya. Tayo, hello my friend once again. I hope you're keeping safe and well.
Yeah, what the hell, Tony? What you gonna do, eh?
Come on, you know the routine. Do I need to ask? Say hello to our audience out there. Come on.
Hello, audience.
At least you're saying hello. This. I mean, it's taken how many shows? We're nearly at 150th show. It's taken a number of shows for you to even say hi. And I'm slowly, over a period of time, many, many years perhaps, get you to be more upbeat. But at least you're saying hi now.
Well, I've got something for the audience, actually.
Oh, go on then.
It's at this time. It's actually serious for once.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. Not my style, but it is. No, it's serious, and I think you'll agree with me. It's quite important. It's something that happened, and let's say it's the advice to my audience is that, to our audience. Yes, don't be racist. Seriously, don't be racist.
Okay. Good
Racism,
point.
yes, racism is a crime, and as the guy was saying, crime is for black people. And oh, hang on, what?
What? What? What? That's terrible.
I can say it.
That's not good. Oh, anyway, let's move quickly on with the show. And today we've got another one of our popular TNT Dynamite Conspiracy episodes where we talk about government overreach. And in particular, we're going to talk about climate lockdowns and digital currencies. Tayo, do you want to kick things off?
I'm not sure I do, because I'm not sure. It's so patently obvious. Is it actually a conspiracy? I mean, government overreach is something that, to me, is self-evident. Everywhere we look, the government is overreaching. In the West, I'm talking about. And
so you don't think China has a government that's overreaching?
no, it's basically a dictatorship. So,
so that's the same thing. So if you had to compare the two, our government compared to theirs, we're nowhere near overreaching as much as something like that.
Well, what's a little strangulation, Tony? Strangulation is strangulation. You know, some the other guy might be stronger and this person might be weaker, but it's still strangulation.
Yeah, but
And
varying degrees. It's not quite that term.
We're at the beginning of a curve, and I see it's going to get worse. And I think I know why there's a curve. And I think I know how it got there, and I think I know where it's going. And we are going towards the Chinese model. I think the era of Western liberal democracy is dead. I think it's well, it's dying. It's not dead, but it is dying. It's not coming back. It's all over, basically.
Well, how if you had to compare? If you had to compare, I mean, to make that claim, there has to be some comparison to a previous way of government that didn't have as much overreach as now. So you can actually see on a scale and go, well, actually, we now can't do X, Y, Z where previously we could. Yeah, so if there's examples of that.
Back in the 80s, we knew what men and women were. We could say basically what we wanted to say. I don't remember growing up in the 80s. I could even say the Soviet Union and communism was a good idea. I could say that in the 80s. I could actually go against the government's I could side with the government's greatest foe, and it was okay. People would sort of think of me as being a bit odd, a bit strange. That you like communism? What the heck is all that about? And I suppose the security services would watch me, but they wouldn't curtail my freedom or anything. Nowadays, it's so dangerous to not be with the majority. I mean, so many people are so frightened. You can lose your job. You can be what is this word that they like using now? Uh,
Self-censorship.
no, there's this word about when you're ghosted by everyone and you can't earn money anymore or anything. You're thrown off platforms and things like
But that's
Donald.
social media platforms.
No, like Donald Trump was. What's it called? There's a word for it. It's not ghosted. What is it again?
oh,
Cancelled.
cancelled.
You're cancelled. I mean, you lose income. People have lost jobs and earnings and things because
Well, if they've gone against company policies because the policies have changed,
I don't
then
remember that in the 80s. I don't. In the 80s, you could say
yeah,
what the hell
but
you wanted to say. In the 70s,
everything has evolved. I
you
mean,
could be you
think
could be a
about
racist
well,
in the 70s and 80s because you had what we claimed was a liberal democracy that everyone had a right to be offended, which we still have, and I still believe in. Everybody's got a right to be offended. But what a lot of people don't understand is you have a right to be offended. What you don't have is a right to not be offended. There's a difference between the two. If I say something that you don't like, it's my right to say it, and it's your right to not like it.
indeed,
What you don't have is a right to tell me not to say what you don't want to hear.
yes.
But that's where we are now,
Mm.
and that's
So,
where
in other
China
words,
is.
it's nipping it in the bud before you even make that
You're not
statement.
allowed to, but who
Yeah,
then tells you what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to
but
do? And that's why
it's
we're more like China now than we were before.
yeah, you can say that. Agree. I agree with you actually, because as more technology becomes rife, you have a squeeze, if I can use that term, on our liberties. Of course they are. Because if you think about it, we have more technology available. Speeding, a simple one. Before the advent of speed cameras, you only could be caught speeding if there was a policeman around. And obviously, there's only a finite number of them. So people would frequently speed in many, many different places. However, our freedom of speeding, so to speak, has been curtailed with the advent of more speed cameras that have spread over the country. And that's the advent of technology. And as more and more technology is released, more our freedoms are curtailed. Things operate faster, and you could say, and if you look at the trend, you could say it's safer, and it is because deaths or injury caused by speeding has dramatically come down since our speeding has been curtailed. So liken that same analogy to society as a whole absolutely applies. So as technology is more and more becoming prevalent, our freedoms are being curtailed because we now speak on a digital platform. Most of us do. We use social media on a day-to-day basis, and it's a digital platform. And because it's so widespread, they have to apply certain rules to it, which our freedoms are curtailed by that very platform that we are using on a day-to-day basis. So I do agree with you. I'm agreeing with you that, but is it government overreach, or is it just the natural progression of technology and our reliance on it?
So I'm going to challenge because I've just recently had to take a course for speeding, for being caught speeding.
Oh dear, naughty boy, slap on hand.
which
There you go. Were
which
you
which
caught by a policeman or a camera?
I was caught by a camera.
There you go.
I was caught by a camera, and it's not my fault. I didn't realize the camera was there.
I'm
So
afraid it is your fault because in this day and age you still have control of the car. It hasn't been totally or not
yeah, I'm not
autonomous.
saying
So
I know. Look, I'm a stand-up guy. Okay, I'm a man. I take responsibility. It's
okay.
my fault. I was speeding. I should have realized there was a camera there. I didn't. So now I know that on junction 13, as you're approaching on the M1, from London. You're just outside of Luton.
Bedford Turning, isn't it?
Bedford Turning, guys, slow down. That blooming camera is working. We are taking. So there we go. Anyway, I'm looking now, and it says this is the Hoffman law firm. Now, I believe this is from the US, so unfortunately, I can't find one in time for this discussion here. But this is 2021, so a couple of years back, and it says the rise in driver speeding has not slowed down. And I've just done a search, and I've got about 4 or 5 hits like that. So I have to challenge your assertion that that cameras have stopped us from slowing down. During my speed course, I actually learned that they have drones now in the air, and the drones can do things like if you changing lanes, if you're undertaking and things like that, they can catch you and spot you, and all sorts of things. And the chap was saying there'll be a rise in the number of cases brought to court because these drones will be able to aid and assist, just as you're saying. And another person on our course said that's very unlikely because the point is not to save or to help the population. The point is to institute control because governments want to control us. And my thesis during this talk we're having today, this show, my thesis is going to be that there's an insidious reason why there's this growing what's what I'm looking for, growing attitude, growing need for control, for the government to control us. And it's all part of it. I'm not a conspiracy person, as you very well know. I think I'd like you to actually, if you agree with me, would you care to nod or say something, Tony? Do you agree that I am not a conspiracy person?
I have to agree. You're not a conspiracy person. By and large, you're not. Although some of your recent postings have been slightly along those avenues.
Well, I'm worried. I'm worried because I'm seeing evidence of something that I shouldn't be. Because if I'm right that there are no conspiracies, which was my original position, I should not be seeing what I'm seeing. But I'm seeing a trend, and that trend doesn't make sense on its own unless somebody can explain it and say, well, you're seeing this trend because of X, Y, Z, and it's nothing to do with the conspiracy. Then I'll breathe a sigh of relief. I'll be like,
okay. Let's go something basic. I mean, before we actually touch on the climate lockdowns, because I want to bring that into the conversation. If we go back several hundred years, okay, even before the US was the USA, we had society that was quite primitive and basic. It had a few laws, but people could do pretty much what they wanted. And if someone had a disagreement, they could kill them. And then laws were introduced by a consensus to sort of prevent that and say, well, look, you can't just go and kill somebody because they've got some use. You've got to sort of bring in certain rules. And people protested because they thought that their freedoms were being curtailed by these laws. Because if I have a disagreement with the landowner up the road, I have a right to kill them if I don't like what they're doing. But no, that was taken away from them because they deemed, the wider public as a whole, deemed that it was better to settle disagreements in a different manner as opposed to just resorting to killing. So you can go back that far and go, well, actually, their freedoms were curtailed. And the same as society moves forward, every new law that is brought in, a law is a curtailment of a freedom because it prevents or punishes somebody who is doing something which is as the eyes of the law is viewed as incorrect. So what you're saying with government overreach is where these laws are applying. Are they affecting our day-to-day working and hampering our freedoms? So we literally cannot breathe. And your eloquent point earlier, I think you made off air, was the strangulation of our freedoms. I mean, that's quite a descriptive word. It's applying pressure around our throat, and the tighter it is, the more we feel the pinch. But it's still strangulation. But you could view it as, from a government point of view, to keep society flowing, the bigger picture, keep society flowing, keep money flowing in the system. By and large, everybody has a modicum of freedom, and that allows them to practice what they want to do, live their life, go to work, do most things. But there has to be the greater good, and we could argue who decides what that is, for the society as a whole, hence why these laws are needed. And government overreach can be viewed by some that it's too much. You put in too much, and the brakes should be applied. So, whoa, stop doing that. I mean, you rightly said about, your view about the EU. The EU laws, in your opinion, were too stifling. So their laws that were stifling our freedom to operate. Hence, the government put a vote to the public. The public voted in agreement with the government, and we left the EU to make it on our own. So we're freer in our ability with our laws. So it's that sort of thing, really.
The thing is about why we stopped killing, or being allowed to kill people, at least in Europe. I can't speak for Africa. I don't know what the African situation was, unfortunately. But in Europe, the reason that people were prevented from killing other people is that 80 or 90% of the other people were serfs at one time. And a serf was basically the property of the Lord.
Mm.
What you were doing is you were destroying the Lord's property.
Yeah.
And it wasn't out of some humanistic, that's not a good word to use, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah,
It wasn't out of finer feelings of,
the humans. Yeah, it was just the fact that the Lord was being affected directly by his serfs being killed.
Yeah, but it's first and life was short anyway, so you really weren't helping. Now, as for these laws that you said that have been brought in increasingly for our protections, that's fine when that's what they do, when they protect us for some funny reason. For instance, a law saying, I'm just pulling this out of the air, comes to mind, a law saying that pilots shouldn't be drunk when they're flying.
Yeah.
That's a pretty reasonable law. No one's going to say the pilot has the rights to be drunk.
Well, the pilot may disagree with that if he's a drunk.
No one, I think his passengers are going to beg to differ. Even if he's flying cargo, the owner of the planes and everyone else around him is going to say it's a health and safety problem. It's obvious. It's not a good idea. If it had zero effect on a pilot's ability to fly, there wouldn't be a problem if he was drunk. But there is a problem. We know that because we've had accidents caused by pilot error, caused by being inebriated, right? However, when it comes to creating laws which contradict what we have called our human rights, which we claim are inalienable, then we got a problem because you're taking away something that is my right. So, for instance, the right to free speech. Now, why is the right to free speech important? Apart from the fact that it allows me to say whatever the heck I like, the most reason that it's important, the reason it is most important, the most vital reason, is that it allows me to contradict the government. It allows me to take the government to task. It is my protection and the protection of society from government overreach. So when government curtails our power of free speech, what they're doing is they are becoming more and more dictatorial. That's the difference between us and saying, I'm not going to say China, because apparently I've read recently that you can actually say quite a lot of things in China, which I wasn't aware of. So I'm going to say something like under Idi Amin or under
North Korea.
Nigerian military or
North Korea.
North Korea. Yeah, you got to be blooming careful what you say in North Korea, right? It's highly suggested that you are very careful what you say in North Korea. Certain countries in the Middle East, there are certain things you can't say about religion or their religious figures. In Pakistan, for instance, you could be lynched for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. So there are clearly countries, systems that we really don't want to be. the problem that I'm seeing is that we're moving towards those systems and away from the liberal democracy systems. And there was one here that said, like, so you were speaking about speeding.
Yeah.
Laws about speeding curtail freedom, but there is no fundamental human rights to speed. You see what I
Yes.
mean?
But
There's
is
no
there a
fundamental.
I mean, okay. I mean, we're digressing a little bit, although government overreach
No,
is
it's
the
government
topic we're
overreach. So if
talking about.
government now talking about, we're going to reach this actually. So I'm jumping ahead a bit.
Yeah, yeah,
We're
sure,
going to
sure,
talk
sure,
about
sure, sure.
we're going to talk about climate lockdowns.
Yeah,
One of the is it a technique? One of the strategies. That's a better word.
yeah,
One of the strategies that governments are going to use. I was reading something online is limiting. Where is it here? Limiting lower speed limits and more stringently enforced for the sake of climate lockdowns.
yeah,
Now, is this a this is argue. There's a logical fallacy called arguing in the extreme, which is when you give a really ridiculous example based on
yes,
a hyper exaggeration.
yeah.
I'm going to use
That
that
argument just to show,
argument
yeah, yeah,
just to show. Supposing they make the highway speed limit motorway, we're saying
yeah, motorway,
okay, the motorway speed limit 20 miles an hour.
yeah,
That's going to, but by train you can go as fast as. That's going to make a lot of people just say, I can't drive to London from Northampton 20 miles an hour. It's going to take me hours to get there, right? And that would be one way of discouraging people because no one's going to drive at 20 miles an hour. It's just like it's too much hassle, man.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, so using that extreme example, is that not now curtailing my freedom of movement?
No,
you see, it's no longer talking
because
about speeding.
the government could argue that to protect the climate, which is the climate bit where we're going to touch on, they're not curtailing your freedom. You're still able to do it. It's just reduced the speed of which you were doing it. So it hasn't stopped you doing it. It's just reduced how quickly you can do it. So they could use that argument that the drop in speed is a factor in reducing climate issues. I mean, for instance, why do we have speed limit of 30 mile an hour in one area like the town and 70 on a motorway anyway in the UK?
Because children and pedestrians, don't mind children, because pedestrians are likely to be crossing roads in 30 mile an hour zones. As you see in the UK here, whenever you're near a school, the speed limit is actually 20 because the kids crossing the road without looking.
There's statistics to show that at 20 mile an hour, if a child was hit, they're more likely to survive than at 30. Yeah.
Yes. I've seen those stats. So that's the answer to your question, because it makes sense.
Exactly.
You can't go screaming down the highway, start screaming down the middle of the town center.
If the climate is at risk, and we will not be here if we don't do something, so is that not government justification for them to say, look, if we have to lock down the country, I mean, because...
Well, I challenge your counterfactual.
Well, okay. Let's go back to the topic itself. During lockdown, when we had the COVID outbreak, it reduced carbon emissions by about nearly 7% to what they would have been.
70%. I've forgotten. Is it like
7%
280 million
tons? Exactly.
Carbon or something.
So they said that we could actually get a massive reduction in our CO2 emissions if we adopted a 8 to 12 week climate lockdown every 2 years. So if our emissions are not being reduced enough by our habits changing, e.g. what you just said, lowering the speed limit of roads, trying to remove cars off the road and make them electric, etc., if those cannot be achieved, then an alternative is a climate lockdown where every 2 years we have a 12-week period where we are locked down like we were in COVID. Would we agree to that if there was an opportunity that it would protect the planet as a whole and stop us destroying ourselves if the evidence is to be believed. That's what we need to question. And these are hard questions. These are not questions that government necessarily want to apply. But if they're seeing this data, which suggests that the planet is overheating, they have more powers than we do. They have to put in place strategies that will aid us in order to ensure that our planet is still got longevity. Because they're saying that if we don't, there'll be 10 to 20 times more deaths due to the planet heating up than COVID ever killed.
Well, I don't believe that for a second.
Okay.
It's my word that I'm not allowed to use. You've banned me from using the word.
I have. Be mindful of your language.
Yes. It's all a lot of nonsense. I don't like the word nonsense. It's so weak as compared to the masculine. It's nonsense. The climate change. You say you're going to prevent climate change. Climate changes all the time, whether humans are on the planet or not.
Heating up, I said as well. The climate is changing.
So climate warming is different. Climate is the evidence of climate warming. Believe me, look. I'm even stuck because my fundamental strategy in dealing with life is this: what's your plan B? So the reason I used to support the climate protection advocates was because I used to say, if people like me, as I am now currently, who poo-poo this idea, if we turn out to be wrong, what's plan B? And it didn't seem as if there was a plan B.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem as if there is a plan B. So from the point of view of just ordinary common sense and my fundamental philosophy, I really should be pro climate protection because I don't see that there's a plan B. So we have to protect. We have to. If there's a suggestion that there could be a danger to our society, to our planet, then common sense just says, well, you just have to work towards lowering the possibility of this danger, lowering the danger,
mitigate the risk.
There we go, mitigating the risk. There ought to be ought to work towards that. However, having looked at the arguments spouted by climate protection people, they're so nonsensical that I just not actually prepared to even consider that we're going to need a plan B. Now, it's wrong think, and I accept that it is because I might still be wrong, and then I have no plan B. But frankly, I'm prepared to take the risk, and that's where I am now. That, all right, I am prepared to countenance the end of the human race if we're wrong, because I just don't believe we're wrong, and I still believe that it could get to the point where we're seeing so many artifacts or so many pieces of evidence that even people like me would have to come along and say, well, do you know what? I think it's time we do something. So right now, I'm just so anti climate protection. I am so anti climate protection that I don't want to know. I don't want to hear. I really don't care what the argument is at this point.
Why do you feel that? If you don't mind me sharing with our audience, why do you feel that the evidence, which is fairly compelling,
it's not compelling.
Disagree with? What do you disagree about it, or is it the manner that it's being implemented that's griping you, as opposed to the data?
It's the data. The data is all made up crap, man.
Made up? Why?
Because I don't mean why. Because people want to make money. That's why. Because the people we call scientists are today, I call them scum. These I've written to you privately, and not privately. I mean offline. When we're just talking.
Yeah.
Between one another, these people are scum. They're grifters. They're just out to make money. That's all, and they'll say whatever anyone is paying them to say. The same people who told us that tobacco was safe and there was no problem with nicotine. These are the same scum.
Hold on. I must jump in there. You can't say that as an example with nicotine, whereas because a lot of the scientists were under the not jurisdiction, but under the sponsorship of some of the tobacco companies, and obviously the tobacco companies have a direct interest on the outcome of the studies. we have got a lot of independent scientists who are not aligned to any one organization, which could have influence on their output.
That's not true.
That is true, because
No,
there's
it's not.
so many
No, it's not.
scientists from different areas around the world. They
Mhm.
can't all be under the same sponsorship and influence of a particular company, industry, or body.
The industry, yes. Company, no. Of course, you want to sell, you want to make solar panels, you want to make wind turbines, you want to do some green energy thing. Obviously, what you're going to do, you're going to open up a foundation or something, and then this foundation is going to pay off these blooming grifters. And then the grifters are going to sit there and sift through the so-called evidence and talk. You the other day, you still telling me that there's an isotope of carbon which is different. And I keep asking, what the heck are you talking about? What isotope of carbon is different? And you can know it's from
I
industrial
have to
output.
find that.
There is no
Again,
such
the
thing. I've
article.
said there's no such thing. There's certain isotopes. We know the isotope. Isotope is 14. Isotope is carbon 14 and carbon 12. Those are the two isotopes. There are no other isotopes. That's it. Those are the two isotopes, and we use them in carbon dating. So I don't know what isotope you're talking about. We know that earlier they said that carbon is the problem. How can carbon be a problem? We have data, hard, no nonsense data, that earlier in the history of the world, we had far more carbon in the atmosphere than we have now. And actually, we didn't have
So why do you believe
powerhouse.
that data from that science, and you don't believe the corresponding data that says that the carbon is increasing again and
Don't you
affecting us
understand?
now?
Don't you understand the argument? The argument isn't that I'm contesting that the carbon is increasing. I'm saying if the carbon is increasing, so what? We've already had the Earth with far more carbon than
So
now. So what
so
is there to worry about?
the
That's what I'm
worrying is
asking.
that there's the temperature of the planet is overheating. Okay,
No, it's
let's.
not.
So you're saying it's not going to match, at the very least, what was
I don't know
done.
what the actual figures are, but let's go like this. Let's say that for right now we got 100 parts, 100 I don't know, 100 whatever
Parts per million.
parts per million of carbon. Let's just say, okay, I don't know what
Yeah.
it actually is, 100 parts per million, all right? And the scientists are saying, oh, we better not get to 130 parts per million, because if we do, we're going to have catastrophic climate events, climate
Okay.
change, okay?
Yeah.
And then we've got actual evidence that we've had 330 parts per million before in the past. And from the fauna and flora of that era, there was no global heating or catastrophic event. Then we're entitled to ask the scientists, what the heck is your problem? We've already had this before.
Can I
What's the
answer
issue?
that? Can
Yes,
I
please
answer
do.
that?
Yeah, go on.
Because that was before man was on the planet.
Right.
And the planet was more covered with fauna and foliage than it is now. So the planet itself has changed. We're more humans on the planet, because back then we don't even know whether humans even were around when those temperatures were recorded. We're not saying it never happened before. We're saying it's happening again in another manner, but now we're here. It's going to affect our way of life, where places that humans are currently living are going to be affected. And they are going to be affected in such a negative way that a lot of people are going to be displaced, or if they refuse to move, will suffer in such a manner that a lot of them could die. This is where the problem is. If we don't want to put a finger on who's done it, doesn't matter. We've accelerated that heat. Doesn't matter. We know the planet was warm before, but there was no humans then. There's probably dinosaurs then. But now it's happening again. Who we put the finger on of blame? Oh, well, it's us accelerated it. It could be. It could be happening naturally. But guess what? We have to do something about it. Otherwise, a lot of people are going to die. This is what we're saying. And there is evidence of that happening around the world, because we see all these increases of extreme weather. And they are because the planet is warming. Now, granted, if humans weren't here, who cares? But unfortunately, we are here. There's 8 billion of us now. Back then, there wasn't. So it wasn't a big an issue. Now it's happening regardless of what the cause is, whether it is us that's accelerated it or it's the planet's cycle that's doing it itself, regardless of how it's happening, we have to deal with it. And we have to somehow lower it or mitigate the circumstances of it. And if we can reduce the carbon in the atmosphere and flatten the curve, I'm going to use that COVID term, flatten the term so the heat, if it does happen, doesn't happen in the next 100 years, but can be pushed out to the next 500 years, then our technology, hopefully, will have improved enough over a longer period that we can deal with it with domes or special technology that protects humans, so we're not as affected as we would be if it happens now. So regardless of whether we've caused it or not, and the planet's doing itself, there's an increase. And we need to ensure that the populations around the world, especially in those vulnerable locations, are protected and we don't see needless death. So going back to our question, climate lockdown, is it government overreach, or is it because the government is seeing data that means we have to do something more drastic in order to protect our livelihood, our children? Then I'm up for that. I'm up for a climate lockdown. Obviously, it won't be quite as severe as the COVID one, but there will be some sort of lockdown to limit our movement of, say, traffic. But we could still go and meet people if we wanted to walk. That wouldn't be prevented. So it wouldn't be quite as extreme as the COVID one, where we couldn't even go and see our friends. We can still do that. It just means the lockdown will prevent us, perhaps, say, driving at certain times of the day. And if it means protecting the planet, then so be it.
Right. Well, I used a logical fallacy earlier. I used it knowingly, and I warned the audience and you that I was going to use this logical fallacy. You've been using this logical fallacy quite a lot, actually. You haven't warned us, and it's a counterfactual. And the fact is that you use a lot of your argument is based on the counterfactual, the word if. If the government is seeing data and if the data is reliable, and I am contesting the second part, is the data reliable? Now, funnily enough, I've had to, when you're looking into climate change, due to, it's not government overreach, but due to the overreach of the tech firms that are hand in glove with government, you have to do it on Yandex. Do you know what Yandex is?
I do.
Okay, for our listeners, Yandex is a browser. It's a Russian browser. And if you're going to do things like look into climate change or gender identity politics, and you don't want to be, you want to see all the information out there, not the ones that these firms are hiding from you. And yeah, Google, I am looking at you. Then you have to use Yandex, the Yandex search engine, to go and to find these things. If you want to find out about Russia, for instance, you have to use Yandex. So in Yandex, I found 10 reasons to prove that climate change is a hoax. And you can just, it's called from eartheclipse.com. So I'm not going to read it all out there, but anyone can go there. I don't know if you may even be able to find it on your own browser. I have no idea. And there's so many other hits. Climate change hoax is what I searched for. And you will find, I mean, some of them are obviously off. The one that says Jewish world order, I don't bother.
Okay.
don't bother with that. But more sensible, reasonable ones, especially from science, because some scientists are fighting back. It's not 100% of scientists who go with this thing. Now, the point, what was I trying to say? Yeah, so the counterfactual means that I can say, hang on, I don't accept your assumption, I don't accept your premise. So why would I then go along with the climate lockdown? I am not going to go with the climate lockdown because I don't accept the premise that there is an actual climate thing. What I'm seeing instead is government overreach for the sake of those in power gaining more power over us.
Okay.
I see to be is the problem, that we've got people who are in power and who want even more power. If they can scare us into climate lockdown, I mean, climate lockdown by itself is not going to give them so much power. But if they cow the population, they will then naturally be able to extend their powers in other areas too.
Of course, of course.
Well,
That's the same logic where you create an external threat,
yeah,
galvanizes the people against that external threat. And it doesn't need to be a threat of violence or war or what have you, but climate could be that external threat that the government can then say, look, follow our guidance, we can protect you, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that
for
makes
your sake.
sense.
We're doing all
Indeed.
this. We're doing all this for you. It's
Yeah,
all
of
for
course
you.
we are.
We're
I totally
protecting you.
get that.
Right?
But
So that's my thing. And then the other one, so climate change, sorry, lockdowns for the sake of climate change. It is government overreach. It's been sold to us. I mean, you've bought into it. It's been sold to us that it's for our protection. But I'm saying absolutely not. And that if anyone is going to do any lockdowns or anything, it's going to be one of these things where we in the hoi polloi, the ones who don't have any power, we've got to start saying, you know what, you first. Remember, there was a time when generals and kings and leaders would lead their troops into battle. Well, they had skin in the game, because if they were saying, let's go and fight so and so, they'd be at the head of the charge. They're risking their lives just as much as any other person on the field of battle, right? Now they're sitting comfy in their offices, air-conditioned offices and whatever, and they're sending other people's children out to go and die. We've got to get back to this thing where it's like, no, where you need to have skin in the game too. If we're having climate lockdowns, then who was it? Boris Johnson, was it our prime
yeah,
minister or
still
prime
had
minister?
the parties and
He
all the
still
rest
had
of it.
parties and things. And it's like, what the heck is going on here? So I will want to see where it's like, I tell you what, if you are no longer able to travel, if you don't use private jets and whatnot to fly around, then we can look at it. But that's not what they're talking about. It's always, these laws are for thee and not for me.
Indeed, and
That's the
then the
problem.
climate lockdown won't work anyway. I mean, obviously, because of what's happened in the UK in particular, and when Boris Johnson was in charge, and how they flouted the very rules
Yeah.
that they put in place regarding lockdown, then you're right. With this government, if this government would remain in power, people would just not buy into climate lockdowns. So that there is that they've lost their credibility in terms of using that as a mechanism. But let's move on to the
Sorry,
other
may I ask one
subject.
question?
Go on.
Sorry to interrupt. May I ask one question? Can you tell me who doesn't pay congestion charges in London?
Who doesn't pay
Yeah.
congestion charges? Congestion charges or the ULEZ charge?
Okay. First of all, I don't know what ULEZ charges, and I doubt other people do.
ULEZ is a separate charge, which is ultra low emission zone charge.
Well,
So
no.
they have a zone which is to do purely with emissions. So if you're within that zone, if you're an electric car, you don't pay it.
No.
If you're a new car, petrol or diesel, within the last 3 years, you also don't pay it. But if you're an older...
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about
you're talking
charge.
about just the congestion charge.
Every car that goes in, every vehicle, but they got to pay because it's trying to not
to reduce the congestion in London. Yes,
the traffic in London. Yes, that's the charge I'm talking about.
Yes.
Do you know who doesn't pay that?
Government officials.
The parliamentarians.
Yeah.
MPs don't pay that.
I know.
So again, it's laws for thee and not for me. So I don't want to hear.
There are other areas as well. For instance, they don't charge nurses. They don't charge doctors that fee either. So any services classed as important services to the capital are not charged. They're exempt.
I'm an important
service. Yeah, no, but come on. You see, this is a steer. This is where that is used.
If it doesn't affect the MPs, it shouldn't affect us. That's my standing. That they've got to face what they make other people face. And they're not saving people's lives. They can pay the booming congestion fee.
Indeed, I think it's more to do means tested personally.
And not even
if you can afford to pay it, then you pay it, and MPs can certainly afford to pay it.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Why?
What do you mean? Why? If you can afford to pay it, you should pay. What is the socialism through the back door? What the hell is that?
Well, no,
There's a law.
because if
It's
you're
everybody
going
pay or
into
don't
London,
pay.
that's like using, the cinema argument. I'm going to go to the cinema. Okay, it doesn't matter what you earn, you still have to pay an entry fee.
Exactly.
Yeah, but if you can't afford to go because you ain't got enough money,
Mm-hmm.
but the congestion charge is stopping you doing certain jobs. So if you're on a low income, you can't go into London and work.
I think we're losing the. I think I don't know. I think I'm losing the
Anyway,
argument.
let's
Yeah,
change. Let's
I'm not.
change subject slightly. I
I'm
wanted to
not
touch
following that
on.
logic at
I
all.
wanted to. I wanted to move on to the digital currencies element because I wanted to cover that.
Yeah,
Whether you believe,
if you're worried about the lockdowns, wait till you hear this
yeah,
stuff.
this one here, digital currencies. I mean, this is also whether it's a government overreach. This is
Oof.
the common term now for it is called what's the word that's used now? CBDC. CBDC, which stands for Central
Central
Bank
bank
Digital
digital
Currency.
currencies.
CBDC. Okay. And there's a fear, obviously, that's been paraded around that if governments are bringing in these digital currencies, a bit like crypto, but government endorsed and government supported, it means we will, as humans, we will be completely at the behest of the government and they can control us, blah, 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 blah. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And I'm going to make some pros and cons for them. Personally, I'm not in favor of them. Okay, but I can see why they would do it. For benefit for themselves, I've got this document here that I'm going to read out, which I had to do some research on, but I want to make sure I get it right. There's obviously, for the industry itself, there's obviously pros because you're removing bureaucracy and you're making it more efficient. It's making it more secure. Because if you think about it now, we're not far away from that now. We don't need a digital currency. We are operating digitally, even now. Because think about it, you have a bank account, okay? And that's held digitally in a bank. It's not a central bank, I'll give you that. It's a private bank. Any of the big players, then they're all independent banks. But it's still a digital account. And that digital account has your digital money in it. It's not physical money, it's digital. And you inform the bank when you want to move it to different places. So you move your digital money from one place to another and it's securely transferred. It's not, it's just a ledger on a account which removes your money in one place and they make sure it's added to the other one. And there's a transaction in between. They take a little cut between the movement, between the banks, and it's moved. So you haven't done anything to a physical currency here. You've moved it digitally from one place to another. So there's already a digital currency here. There's also an operational side where, remember when direct debit payments were first introduced? There was uproar. What do you mean? I let companies take money directly from my account as much as they need for a payment. No, that's wrong. That's taking my civil liberties away. It's control. Now direct debits are standard stuff. We allow third-party organizations to dip into our digital bank account held on a bank digital platform to take money out, in figurative terms, to use on our behalf.
The difference is this: you can cancel your direct debit at any time.
Indeed. And you'll be able to do the same with digital currency.
You can't dip out of digital currency at any time.
What do you mean dip out?
You can't use cash because the where all this is headed is a cashless society.
Indeed.
It's like, I think in China
we're here already. Now anyway.
Well, no, because you can go to the bank and draw cash, but in future you may be able to go to the bank and draw any cash.
No,
there'll be no cash.
I can't do that now. The obstacles are there to not do that.
Well, I'm sorry, I draw cash all the time. What's the issue?
Okay.
I don't understand what you're talking about. You go to
Why
the bank,
would you need to draw cash if
I do a lot of things where by the way, is the government going to be watching this?
Well, probably based on my experiences in the US recently, but yeah, go on.
Okay, so for my own private reasons, I decide not to tell you what I'm doing. No, there are just loads of times with using cabs and things like that where Chinese restaurants don't really like using. If you go to if you go to a Chinese takeaway, they want cash. They don't want you to pay in card. And I think the government should look into that because that's not right. And I go to Chinese restaurant quite a lot. Chinese takeaway, sorry, quite a lot. Cab people, you can just pay them off with cash rather
Oh,
than.
they take cards.
Yeah, but for me, it's just there you go, bam bam, and a little bit of a tip, and Bob's your uncle. It's fine. So yeah, that's what
Can
I
you
use for.
see? Can you see where, from a bank and industry point of view, that fraudulent transactions can be reduced considerably?
Oh, look, fraudulent transactions will be reduced, but again, it's this thing about it's for your good that we're doing this, but it's not because where
Well, it's
the
their good
con
as well as your good. It's
where
both ways.
where the cons are, you were telling us about the pros. Where people like me are worried about is this: what happens when your doctor says you need to lose weight, and we can see from your data that you're buying a lot of chocolates.
Well, they can
So,
see that now.
yeah, well, they can't stop you from buying
They
chocolates or
can't
anything else.
stop you then
But
either.
they will be able to because you won't be able to spend the actual money. Isn't this what they're saying?
No, this is where the conspiracy element comes in, and that's topical for our show,
Yes.
where people are afraid,
Mm-hmm.
and they're almost science fiction adding this to that. Oh, we're going to be in a dystopian world. The central banks will have direct control over everything we do. They'll even know what our tax status is because there'll be no currency. Everything is controlled by them. We're in
Yeah,
a dystopian
exactly. Well,
society.
wouldn't they?
It's not going to get to that level of control. It just is not.
Well, promise
It's,
and cross your heart and hope to die. How do you know that?
well, how? Because it's too complicated.
Eh?
Okay, think about this for a moment, right? For central banks which control the taxation system, they would then have to eradicate all private banks. Do you think the private banks, with their influence, would allow that?
Why would they have to to eradicate all?
That's the whole point of the taxation part. The central banks are the government controlled industries. If they had total control of our funds, you banking with central bank, not with your bank. And in order for that to happen, the normal bank would be out of business. How would that happen?
Why can't the central bank simply monitor what is happening inside the commercial banks?
The
Just because.
commercial banks and private banks are exactly that. They're self-entities. They're still their own autonomous
Yes.
individual. They don't care
But
about tax.
it's digital.
Yeah.
Can't the central bank, since it's digital, simply be aware of
So the
what's going
banks
on?
become brokers.
I'm not saying I'm talking about broker. I'm just looking as a programmer. I'm just looking at it as well as a former programmer. I'm just looking at it as being something like you simply copy records across to the central bank. So if you do a transaction, you and I send you some money within our respective commercial banks.
Yeah.
That transaction takes place,
Yeah.
and then that transaction is merely copied over to the central bank.
That's exactly what happens now when
Well,
fraud is being looked at.
Well, exactly. But the point is that it's digital. Then the central bank then can intervene if it wants to and place what nowadays we call sanctions. Think
Yeah.
about a sanctions regime.
That's exactly right, but it's implemented by the private banks. You're not banking with the central bank.
Yes, but if the central bank then says this person's wallet, if you like, this digital wallet is closed.
Yeah.
That's it. Like an account can be closed.
Yeah, but it instructs the bank to do it because the bank is a private entity.
I know, but you're not getting the idea that then the person right now, if I've got a lot of cash on me, or if I can get cash, you can stop my bank account, but I'm still going to be working with cash, right? I'm not dead in the water.
Right, but if you're fraudulent, then
cashless, when it's a cashless society, I'm dead in the water. That's it. I can't do anything.
Right.
Well, that's the danger.
But the reason for that, but the thing is, the thing is, they won't instill a fraud lock or a risk on your account, yeah, if you're doing things normally. Now if you're
That's
thinking
ridiculous,
that the
Tony. People
government,
get
no,
shot. Someone just died 3 or 4 days ago. What is this? What's today? Sunday? Someone just died last week because the police in some town in America went to the wrong address and shot this poor guy to death.
yeah,
Accidents happen, misidentification. You could be
absolutely
sitting
they
there
do,
saying
but they
that,
happen
and then the
now.
next thing is that you're hammered. You can't flip and do anything. You can't call. Your phones won't work. Nothing. All your digital is all done. It's too much power for the government to have. What
It isn't
cash
likely to
gold.
be this way. This is what you're saying. This is scaremongering, and this is part of our Dynamite Conspiracy episode. Is whether digital currencies, I can't even say it now, are they genuinely this dystopian risk that we have now moved, tenfold into this society where as soon as they introduce this, they have total control. Money's outlawed. That's not how it works. It isn't how it works. All the banks in between are all separate entities. They're powerful in their own right. The government oversights them anyway and puts regulation in, but they are all independent entities. For it to be the description that you describe, for central banks to literally control you, stop an account, you are dead in the water, is if they get rid of all the banks and they have sole control of everything. That's a dystopian environment. And yes, in that scenario, sure, then there's the likelihood of them having total control. But because you've got this huge layer of banks in between that are private entities and they've got a big say and influence in all this, it's never going to be in the situation that is described by a lot of conspiracy theorists saying that digital currencies will be the end of our freedoms completely and we could be wiped out at a drop of a hat. It's not how it will work in practice. It just will not. Digital currencies will allow for less fraud. Now, granted, because you've now taken away the cash element, but you'll still be able to use your account, and there's nothing going to stop you having multiple accounts with digital currency in them. They're all isolated independently. It's only if the government decide that you as an individual have done something wrong that all your accounts will be closed.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'll have a problem. Even Abramovich, who was closed down by his accounts, he could still use his phone. He didn't lose communication skills. He didn't use his ability to phone people. So what?
No,
His
until the end
payment
of the month.
on his bank on his phone didn't just all of a sudden
Well,
stop.
until the end of the month,
Yeah,
and then
so
at the end of the month, then your next payment doesn't go out. Then the phone company
well, that
says,
happens
"No,
now. Guess what? You got no money in your bank account because you've lost your job and you've thrown it all away on a gambling debt or something like that. Guess what? That happens now. So there's nothing new about digital currencies and this fear of them. Yes, there are elements of cons because you don't want the government to use. I mean, the bigger risk actually is a cyber risk.
Can you go to the markets and buy? When I say market, I'm thinking about Northampton here, but wherever you are, can you go to a store to a market stall anyway? Can you walk in, buy a SIM, and put it into your phone and just pay cash? Can you do that right now?
A buy as you go sim.
Yeah, and pay for it in cash.
I think you can pay for it in cash, but they have to take your details to activate it.
Okay, so if you go to the marketplace, you can actually buy these pay as you go, and you can pay for cash for it. I know that you can do
Okay.
that. It's
Why would you want to?
No, because the government has closed down your accounts and you no longer have access to your accounts. So if you have cash on you, you can do that. My
What?
point is
Okay.
that when we go to a cashless society and it's all digital currency, you can't do that any longer. This is the ultimate freedom. It's the freedom to spend your money that you've earned. You can't because the government controls it. And by the way, now we're talking about central banks. What happens if America decides to sanction a country? And they just, I don't know, whatever they do with the digital currency, they just like they tried to do to Russia. Can you imagine? It would be madness to get involved in this scheme. It's absolute bonkers.
Let me explain something here about the currency element. No currency is owned exclusively. No one country controls the currency of another country. They're all independent. So if America chose to affect the dollar, it's those countries that are pegged to the dollar that would be affected. But a country can unpeg itself. Did you know that a lot of the Middle East countries choose to peg to the US dollar?
I do.
Including China. Including China.
Well,
they peg to the
now.
US dollar. Yes.
Just this week they've signed.
They're trying to move away from that. Yeah.
Okay. There's something called the IMF.
International Monetary Fund. Yes.
And the IMF,
I'm mindful of the time, by the way, so we need to.
The IMF has just held its spring. What they call it, spring meeting.
Yeah.
Is it called spring?
Yeah.
IMF. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, I think it's called a spring meeting. They just held a spring meeting, and they are now going to have a simplified global financial system where they're going to have this international central bank digital currency. And here we go. At the recent spring meeting, has announced a new global digital currency.
Digital currency.
A global digital currency.
Okay, now that's a slightly different element. That's news to me,
right?
Because central bank digital currencies has been the only game in town.
This is the one that they've just agreed to now, and they're working on it.
If they've agreed to that, then that's a different thing, and that is a nightmare. You would not want that.
From the point of view of freedom of nations and individuals, the key feature of this system is, this is the IMF saying this, by the way.
Okay, go on.
The key feature of this system is jurisdictional sanctions enforcement.
Wow. See, that's not a good idea. And that's completely different to digital currencies of what our theme of topic here. Now you've hit on one which could be a conspiracy. That is bad news. But central bank digital currencies.
I can't believe that the Chinese and the Russians would go along with that.
That's nonsense. I'm not joking.
Yeah, but apparently it's the one that just come up. I mean, I can't do it now, but search for spring meeting IMF digital currencies.
I would love to read that. I'll be honest. Spring meeting.
IMF spring meeting, central bank digital currency.
Wow. Now, if they say that the central bank digital currencies should be linked, so each country is responsible for their own digital currency.
Make a lot of sense.
That would make sense, and then
if you like digital currency, which I don't, but at least that makes more sense.
That makes more sense. This is what I'd like to see, the detail of this. But if you're saying one digital currency for the whole planet, no, that's a disaster.
Yeah, one ring to rule them all.
Indeed. I mean, there's also another group, which is the Bank of International Settlements, and it's called the BIS. Now, they're a forum for central banks to collaborate and share information on monetary policy and financial stability. Now, you never heard of them. And they also provide banking services to central banks and other international organizations, because the planet functions on trade. And to keep trade working and people to get food on their plates and industry to run and profits, you have to have this global cooperation. But it is cooperation. So indeed, it can be viewed by some people as some cabal that they all agree, but they do it to keep the cogs of the machine running.
So that to the Russians.
Well,
they saw their reserves stolen.
Well, they haven't been stolen; they've been frozen. They will get them back once this ends.
What's the difference?
There is some part of that. They're not. You're not reading all the bits.
Not too long ago, the EU was trying to find. Fortunately, they came back and said they couldn't do it. But not too long ago, the EU was trying to find a way of permanently seizing it and giving.
They did look at it. They raised the question. It was some people in the European Parliament, and that was batted away and said, "No, don't be stupid. That's their money." And so it was thrown out in the end. But in a democracy, absolutely, you can raise that question. But obviously, common sense prevailed and went, no, it's Russia's money. Despite the fact they're doing this war, it's still their money. So it was clarify. But you're right, they did raise that question in the Parliament. What I do want to ask very quickly, because I am mindful of time.
Has America not decided to give it to give away the money of the oligarchs? I don't know about this Russia's money, but I know they're selling yachts and things that belong to the oligarchs. So it's not going back to the oligarchs.
It's strange, isn't it? I don't know the detail of that.
Private property is, forget about private property. That's human rights. That doesn't exist in America right now.
That's a separate subject on itself. But I mean, I'm mindful of the time. I mean, we have gone over. We could cover with this at length. Going back to the government overreach, what's your view? I mean, taking climate lockdown as a factor, digital currencies as a factor, is it government overreach if the government were to implement these things, in your view?
Look, it's government overreach to even suggest that the speed limit should be 70 miles an hour. This is Ty's position. So what do you think when it comes to these other things? I mean, I am so liberal and so pro-liberal, that we should be able to
liberal. You want to behead people that don't follow your views. So you're quite a bit weird. You 1 minute you want complete freedoms for people. They should be free to say and do and act in any way they want. However, if they don't follow Tayo's laws, then behead them. So
you are free to do what you want if it doesn't threaten the state, the security of the state. I call it defense of the realm. So whenever I say anything, it is that the state should be strong and should have a strong military, a strong arm, and be able to defend itself against other people. Now, what you're doing, if it doesn't threaten that, do what you like, say what you like. But the second you start messing around with state security, all bets are off. And I think that's fair. I don't see the problem with that.
Okay.
So digital currencies and whatnot, that's not going to help state security. That is going to help create dictators. And with a dictator, ultimately the state will be weaker because dictatorship leads to corruption. Corruption leads to the weakening of the state. So this is why you need everything to be open. I'm very pro-open government, because openness is what fights corruption.
Well, strangely, digital currencies will create openness because they'll be in ledgers that need to be read by others for the ledger to work. So you actually get more openness.
That aspect I like.
Yeah.
But the aspect that somebody can switch it off, that is too much power. That's the problem.
The switching off bit is something that happens now anyway. But the switching off will be harder to implement because the ledger would be available for scrutiny to see why would that need to be switched off.
Because the government says so. Look,
the government can do that now. There's no difference.
And I tell you to switch it off, you're going to have to switch it off because I'll tell you it's defense of the realm, and then that's the end. So it's too much power. That's it. That's just it. It's far too much power. Lockdowns are too much power. It's too much power given to the governments. My final thing is no.
Okay. Brilliant. We can talk at length of this. It's a great topic. We may address it again in the future. But unfortunately, we have reached the end of the show for another week.